call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 28 of the House of Commons Special Committee on the Canada People's Republic of China relationship. Pursuant to the order of reference of May 16, 2022, the committee's meeting on its study of the Canada People's Republic of China relations with a focus on Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and the members. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding. And in deference to my colleague from the Fisheries Committee, I would also mention that if you have your earpiece too close to the microphone, that will cause feedback, which is very, very difficult for our interpreters, so be careful on that. Now, when he arrives, Mr. Bolaris is going to be substituting for Ms. McPherson.
He's online.
Oh, he's online. Oh, there you are. Ah, good. Alexandra, good to see you. MP Leslie is subbing for Mr. Kimmich for the first hour of the meeting. And we have, let's see, Mr. Leslie and Mr. Janice. You're here as you, I presume.
No, Ms. Landsman, I guess.
Oh, Ms. Landsman.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You're here for Ms. Landsman, and the shoes are killing you. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Very good. Okay. All right. Now, I'd like to welcome our first panel, and it's very good to be back in session where we're actually, entertaining panels and getting feedback. This particularly on the Indo-Pacific strategy, which was really the focus of a lot of discussion some of us had in Washington with our opposite number on the Select Committee there. So I would like to welcome a guest for our first panel. We have Ambassador McKay, Ambassador of Canada to Japan, and the Special Envoy for the Indo-Pacific. From the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Weldon Epp, Assistant Deputy Minister, Indo-Pacific, and Amanda Strohan, Director General, Indo-Pacific Strategy, Policy, Planning, and Operations. Ambassador McKay, you have up to 5 minutes. I'll ask you to lower the boom. Yep, that's perfect. And take yourself off mute, and you're on your way. Ambassador, you're speaking to us from the future. I know that on the other side of the international date line. There we go. Perfect.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for having invited me to appear before the committee today. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to provide an update on Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy and to contribute to your study. Canada has important interests at stake in the future of the Indo-Pacific region. The Indo-Pacific is at the epicenter of a global generational shift. All the issues that matter to Canadians, such as their national security, economic prosperity, democratic values, the quality of our environment, and human rights will be shaped by developments of the situation in this region and also by Canada's relationships with its Indo-Pacific partners.
Generational shift demands a response that is comprehensive and enduring, and firmly rooted in Canada's national interests, our strengths, and global priorities. The Indo-Pacific is the fastest growing economic region of the world and accounts for almost 2/3 of global growth. By 2030, it will be home to 2/3 of the global middle class. By 2040, the region will account for more than half of the global economy. Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy is built around 5 interconnected strategic objectives that build on decades of investment and engagement in the region. The 5 pillars are promoting peace, resilience, and security, expanding trade, investment, and supply chain resilience, investing in and connecting people, building a sustainable and green future, having Canada as an active and engaged partner to the Indo-Pacific. In short, Mr. Chair, we're talking about security, trade, people-to-people exchange, climate, and diplomacy. And I'd like to take a minute to very briefly outline some of the key elements that are underway under each pillar of the strategy. On peace and security, Canada is making significant contributions through the Canadian Armed Forces toward regional security. The deployment of 3 Royal Canadian Navy frigates, a supply ship, and 2 RCAF planes, along with our increased participation in multilateral exercises in the region, has been very well received by our partners in the region. As well, through the strategy, Global Affairs is making significant contributions to build capacity in the region on counterterrorism and weapons threat reduction programs. These are in partnership with CBSA and the RCMP. Under the trade pillar, Mr. Chair, the strategy is providing enhanced support for Canadian SMEs, entrepreneurs, and industry associations to penetrate markets in the Indo-Pacific through the CAN Export Program. There is support for the Canadian Chambers of Commerce who operate throughout the region, and there are a series of Team Canada trade missions to Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Korea, and Indonesia. The first of these missions was just in Japan 1 month ago, and over 150 companies from all over Canada participated in a highly successful mission. On people-to-people exchanges, the third pillar of the strategy includes an expansion of Canada's SEED scholarship program to encourage up to 1,000 students to study in Canada, as well as a scholarship program to bring Canadian students, researchers, academics to pursue their studies and research in the Indo-Pacific, building more capacity and expertise for Canadians in the region. On climate and sustainability, the Indo-Pacific strategy will support the scale-up of Canada's remarkable clean tech sector companies by supporting first commercial demonstrations in key Indo-Pacific markets. The recapitalization of FinDev Canada will allow Canada to participate in a more fulsome manner in the infrastructure and climate-related coastal degradation projects that are critical to so many countries in the Indo-Pacific region. Finally, on diplomacy, through the Indo-Pacific strategy, Canada's overarching priority is to become a more active, engaged, and reliable partner in the region. We will increase and deepen our political, economic, and security partnerships with an expanded diplomatic presence in key posts, including opening for the first time a diplomatic mission in Fiji. Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy was created in large measure as a response to the emergence of China as a major global economic and military power, and to deepen and broaden our engagements with partners throughout the region. This includes India, with whom we are going through an extraordinarily difficult time. While nothing that has transpired in recent months could have been foreseen in the creation of the strategy, I'm of the view that the 10-year whole-of-government approach to the Indo-Pacific region will allow us to weather this storm and other storms successfully. With that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Ambassador McKay. We'll now go to our first round of questioning, but I have not sort of detailed our replacements on the Liberal side. We have Ms. Damoff in for Rob Oliphant, Mr. Casey is here for Madame Lalonde, and Mr. McDonald is here for Mr. Fragaskatos. So, for our first round of questioning, for 6 minutes or less, we'll go to you, Mr. Seaback.
Yes, so thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In reading through the Indo-Pacific strategy on page 9, well, actually, it starts on, we talk about specific countries, starts on page 7 with the People's Republic of China. Then, of course, the next country it talks about is India. And under the goals in its engagement, it talks about seek to expand market access by concluding an early progress agreement as a step towards a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. Where are we on the status of the early progress trade agreement with India?
Thank you for the question, sir. So, with recent developments, the discussions toward a free trade agreement, in essence, with India have been put on hold. They've been paused. I think to allow for the process to unfold that will get us through this particular difficult situation with India. Free trade agreements are extraordinarily complicated, complex, all-encompassing endeavors, and I think it'd be important for those who are negotiating on both sides of the deal to be able to do so free of fairly significant and major distractions.
The next bullet point in the strategy is that Canada would create a Canada-India desk within the Trade Commission service to promote the implementation of the EPTA. I assume that has not taken place yet either.
That is my understanding as well, and if I'm incorrect, then I'm sure Mr. Epp would correct me, but I presume that has also been on hold.
The next point there would be invest in and connect people by bolstering Canada's visa processing capacity in New Delhi and Chandigarh. And as a subset to that question, when I was on the Immigration Committee, it was put forward that visa applications were no longer actually being processed in Chandigarh. They were actually just collecting them and sending them to Delhi to be processed. So my question is two steps. Number one, is Canada bolstering its visa processing capacity in New Delhi and Chandigarh? And then the subset of that is, are applications actually being processed in Chandigarh, or are they just collecting them and having them processed in New Delhi, as I was told at the Immigration Committee a little over a year ago?
As a result of the removal of 2/3 of the diplomats in our missions across India, those processings cannot happen in Chandigarh, and we will await a reestablishment of those personnel being able to do their jobs in our consulates and in Delhi to complete this part of the strategy.
You didn't answer my second question. Are actual visas being processed in Chandigarh, as we are led to believe, or are they merely collecting these applications in Chandigarh and having them processed in New Delhi?
Yeah, it is my understanding that there is no processing going on.
Yes, Ms. Danvers.
I know I'm new here, but I thought this was the Canada-China Committee, not the Canada-India Committee.
Yeah, we're looking at the Indo-Pacific strategy, so it's relevant. I'm sorry.
Take a look at the meeting notes before you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is my understanding that the processing is not happening in Chandigarh at this moment.
So no visas that go into the Chandigarh office are actually being processed in Chandigarh. They're being sent to Delhi to be processed.
Our diplomats in Chandigarh have in fact been removed from India, and so there is no capacity to be processing them there.
Okay. The agricultural office that is supposed to be set up in the Indo-Pacific as part of the Indo-Pacific strategy, $31.8 million to establish Canada's first agricultural office in the region. Tell me what the status of that is, how much money has been spent, what's the money been spent on, and what's the rollout of the remainder of those expenditures?
So the objective of the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada office in the region was to put a physical presence for Canada to promote, to facilitate, to expand our trade in the same time zone as our client countries in the region. On terms of the operational issues and the budgetary issues, I would have to defer to Mr. Ephraim, Ms. Strohan, but certainly the objective of having that office is something that was very, very well received by our agriculture, agri-food, seafood producers all across Canada.
Yep, the operational stuff was what I want to know about. So
So thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The new AFC office will be announced very soon. It will be operational in the Philippines. Hiring has begun. So in terms of the actual dollars, I'm not sure we have that. We'll look during this session, but we're very close to seeing boots on the ground and an open door in our mission there.
Thank you, Mr.
this
Seaback.
was
Sorry,
announced
your
a
time
year ago.
has run out. We'll now go to Ms. Damoff for 6 minutes or less.
Thanks, Chair. And I would note that I did read the notes that we got, and it quite clearly talks about the People's Republic of China in relation to the Indo-Pacific strategy. But just to make sure that Mr. Seaback knows that I am prepared when I come in here. My question is with regard to the minister's decision to develop and implement an Indo-Pacific strategy, how that has impacted and allowed us to navigate that relationship with China over the course of the last year.
Thank you for the question. So, obviously China, as with every other country in the Indo-Pacific region, is well aware of the strategy, the Indo-Pacific strategy that was developed by Global Affairs Canada and partner departments across the Government of Canada. I'll be, as clear as I can be in terms of China's response. They're not spending a whole lot of attention, a lot of time thinking about our Indo-Pacific strategy. I don't think it has enhanced our dialogues going forward, but at the same time, I don't think it has hindered our dialogues going forward. One of the remarkable outcomes, if you will, of the quiet diplomacy that's going on between Canada and China over the past year, in the time where we've had our Indo-Pacific strategy published, was the ability for Canada to host on China's behalf the Biodiversity Conference in December of 2022, where China was unable to host such a conference. And in spite of all the difficulties that we have been and are experiencing with China, I think Canada demonstrated that maybe in a way better than almost any other country in the world, we were able to work very efficiently, very quietly, very effectively with the government of China to essentially host or co-host on their behalf that biodiversity conference in Montreal. Between China and Canada, I think that was an extraordinarily impressive feat. It allowed China to save face, if you will, as they were planning to host a conference that they found, a global conference that they found that they were unable to do. Canada stepped up and at the diplomatic and officials level worked very, very effectively to host and co-host that conference in Montreal. I think that was a terrific outcome that happened all the while China was aware of our Indo-Pacific strategy being launched.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Earlier this month, the G7 foreign ministers gathered in Japan, and the U.S. hosted the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum in San Francisco, which saw President Biden and Xi have a summit on the margins. I just wondered if you could update us on the how these two meetings took place, how things went for Canada in those two meetings.
Thank you for the question. Yes, indeed, with Japan as the host country for G7 in 2023, they in fact hosted 16 ministerial conferences as well as the Leaders Summit that took place in May. In terms of the Foreign Affairs Ministers Summit, there was one in April, there was a secondary one in November. At both of those meetings, Minister Joly, of course, was present in Japan, and things changed between the April meeting and the November meeting in terms of global activities. The focus at the April meeting was to engage with G7 partners and talk about the situation in Ukraine. The focus on the November meeting was on the situation in Ukraine as well as the situation in Israel and Palestine and the Gaza Strip. With respect to APEC in San Francisco recently, I think there's no doubt that the event that took up all the oxygen in the room was the anticipation of the President Biden, President Xi summit, which by all accounts was a successful 4-hour summit. And I think it was important not just to those two countries, but also to Canada and all the other APEC nations and perhaps nations around the world, that China and the United States essentially set a bit of a reset and took the temperature down a little bit on the frictions that have been happening between those two countries. That, in effect, lowers the temperature, I think, globally for many countries in their relationships with China. The decision by the two leaders to speak more frequently, to be able to pick up the phone and speak virtually at any time they wished, is something that hasn't happened for a while. And I think Canada takes great comfort that was achieved at the APEC summit in San Francisco.
Thank you, Ambassador McKay. We'll now go to Mr. Bergeron for 6 minutes or less.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Your Excellency, for being with us today. Thank you also to Mr. Epp and Ms. Strohan for also being here today. I am amongst those who think that words are important. Words count. And when we received the answer from the government vis-à-vis the report that was produced by this Committee on Taiwan, we were surprised because certain recommendations were dealt with in a very lukewarm way by the government. In particular, this expression where they said often the government takes note in reaction to a recommendation. For example, there was one recommendation which stated that the Government of Canada should offer and declare clear, unwavering commitment that the future of Taiwan should only be decided by Taiwanese people themselves. And the government just responded by saying, we take note of that. So why was there this lukewarm response, something that is quite obvious, namely that the Taiwanese' future should be decided by the Taiwanese themselves?
Thank you for the question. And I would agree that the future of Taiwan would be determined, as it will be certainly in the short term, through their elections, which I think are happening early next year. I was not present at that committee hearing, but perhaps if my colleagues, Mr. Epp and Ms. Strohan, have more detail on the exchange there, they might be able to assist me in responding more fulsomely to your question, Mr. Bergeron.
So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. And as I think the committee is well aware, Canada's longstanding policy takes note of positions on Taiwan, its status, and its future without endorsing or pronouncing on it. Obviously, over the years, Taiwan and the people of Taiwan and Canada have worked closely together in many ways, economic, people to people. And we've watched democracy flourish in Taiwan and Taiwanese individuals exercise their franchise. And as Ambassador McKay noted, they'll have an opportunity to do so soon. But it's a position of the government of Canada that we urge all sides to not change or bring unilateral change to the status quo across the Taiwan Strait, given the interests not only of the people on both sides of the strait, but the interests of Canada. Thank you.
Un des grands constats que nous avons.
One of the main observations that we said in or noted in our mission in Washington was to the effect that there at least needs to be an attempt to have a better alignment of our Indo-Pacific strategies, our respective strategies. And in the American Indo-Pacific strategy, it says the U.S. is going to work with Taiwan to ensure that their future is in line with the wishes of the Taiwan people. That seems quite clear to me. So our Indo-Pacific strategy, what does it say about the future of Taiwan? Should it also depend on the desires of the Taiwanese people, or is our strategy different from the U.S. strategy on this point?
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take the question. If the ambassador wants to add, he can. So I take the point. It's an interesting one. We speak regularly with our colleagues on Taiwan at State Department and White House. I'm obviously, stating the obvious. We have a different strategy. Our Indo-Pacific strategy is not identical to the American one, but we share many interests and we coordinate closely. What I would say is Canada, although we do not have diplomatic relations with Taiwan, and we do not, like the United States, have an active Congress that commits us to the defense of Taiwan or provision of military assets to Taiwan, we have a broad range of ways in which we continue to support the interests, I think, of the region, of the globe, in seeing democracy and a free economy flourish in Taiwan. That includes conclusion of negotiations on a foreign investment protection arrangement and a recent MOU on health. And there are things that the government of Canada is able to do with authorities in Taiwan that, frankly, some of our like-minded won't do. When it comes to the United States, they're sort of in a unique category, given, again, acts of Congress, Taiwan Relations Act, and the way in which their military provides security across the region. But you will note recent joint exercises in the Taiwan Strait between Canadian frigates and American frigates. And so where we can and where it's in our interest, we do align very closely with the approach of partners. But I wouldn't pretend that our policy and our toolkit track exactly with the United States.
Time for a short question and a short answer, Mr. Bourgeois.
Très simplement,
Yes, very simply. What did the department mean when they said to this committee, we have taken note of your recommendation that the future of Taiwan should be decided by the Taiwanese people? What did that mean?
Mr. Chair, I think that response speaks for itself. I think the government did take note of that view of the committee. This is not a new policy issue, and I think the government will continue to review its posture, both given present circumstances, but given developments that may come.
Thank you, Mr. Epp. We'll now go to Mr. Bolaris for 6 minutes or less.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm very happy to be with you today to replace my illustrious colleague from Edmonton. We're very happy to see that the ambassador and the representatives from the government are here with us today to discuss the Indo-Pacific strategy of the federal government. There are lots of opportunities offered to us with this strategy, but there are also challenges and difficulties that we need to grasp and place within the overall Indo-Pacific geopolitical situation. I have a first question, because if we take a step back for a moment, what are the factors that influenced the decision to actually develop this specific strategy specific to the Indo-Pacific region? Where did this idea come from and this initiative?
Ambassador, you're on mute, sir. There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. I think there are two primary drivers. One is a long-term driver that Canada has made efforts to over many, many decades to be a more engaged partner in the Indo-Pacific. But frankly, we have spent most of our economic history tied to Europe and the United States and Central and South America. The recognition that the Indo-Pacific region, as I said in my opening statements, being the fastest growing economies in the world, really was a critical driver for all of Canada, all of Canadian businesses, to have opportunities to diversify our trade, to take advantage of an area of the world that will have 2/3 of the middle class within 10 or 15 years, and just to recognize that the economic shift that's happening from Europe and even North America to the Indo-Pacific region is real, it's coming, and Canada needs to be a part of it. On a more recent sort of driver of the strategy, as I mentioned in the opening, I think the emergence of China as a significant economic and military power, and in some ways disruptive power, has made it critical for Canada to engage with more partners in the region so that our relationship with the Indo-Pacific isn't determined by our relationship with one or two large players. And I think that's going to be a very significant outcome. Canada, as you will recall, became a strategic partner with the ASEAN nations in September when the Prime Minister was visiting there. Now, this is critical because I'm not sure there's another country in the world that has the hat trick of being a strategic partner with the ASEAN, as well as undergoing free trade agreement negotiations with all of the ASEAN nations and bilaterally with Indonesia, which is a population of 280 million people. And so I think those are the critical drivers that led Canada to the development of a strategy that is very well resourced. It encompasses 17 different departments and agencies of the Government of Canada. And it means we're not there as an episodic interloper in the region, but as a long-term strategic partner that will benefit, we think, all of Canada.
Merci beaucoup pour la réponse, c'est éclairant.
Thank you very much for that enlightening answer. There's something I'd like to further clarify. What are the groups within Quebec and Canadian civil society with whom you had consultations before or during the drawing up of this Indo-Pacific strategy? For example, did you consult with union groups or human rights groups before you drew up this strategy?
Thank you for the question. There was an extraordinarily broad, comprehensive consultation strategy leading up to the formalization of the Indo-Pacific strategy. And I think the message we heard from all stakeholders across Canada was, please make it right this time. And I say that because for decades, Canada has, as I said earlier, episodic
Excuse me, Ambassador, we have to
interventions.
suspend for just a second. We have a technical issue here.
No, I think it's an important question because the consultations that took place before the formalization of the strategy, the messages were loud and clear. Let us get it right this time so Canada doesn't go into different parts of the region and then get distracted by other global issues. And I think the fact that this is a 5-year funded, 10-year view across 17 departments and agencies really takes the message from the stakeholders that we've got to be sort of all in this case. The recognition by business, by academia, by provinces, territories, associations, that the Government of Canada needed to take a leadership role in this and facilitate and allow more Canadians, more businesses, more people to engage in the region on a more fulsome basis was the message we heard loud and clear. Of all the pillars of the strategy, I think the third pillar, and they're not in any order of priority, but that's just the way they've come on the page. The people-to-people exchange, that pillar of the strategy, in my view, will be the most sort of heavy lifting, but I think will have the most long-term significant benefits for all Canadians. And we're talking about getting more opportunities for small and large Canadian businesses to engage in the region, to increase trade, to increase inbound investment, to encourage students to study in the Indo-Pacific region, also to have the best and the brightest from the Indo-Pacific region to come to Canada to build their Canada capacity. This is something that I think will have extraordinarily positive benefits long-term for Canada, and it will require a lot of work and a lot of heavy lifting, but I'm confident that the framework that is set out will allow us to build a generation of Indo-Pacific experts in academia, in business, in politics, and culture through the deployment of this strategy.
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll now go to our second round, and we'll begin with Mr. Chong for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of our witnesses for appearing. I read the Indo-Pacific Strategy a number of times. It's a succinct 23 pages. My first question is that it mentions the term clean energy 4 times. For example, it mentions on page 18 that Canada will position Canada to be a reliable supplier of clean energy in the region. What is the definition of clean energy? Because I have not been able to find that anywhere in the document or on the Government of Canada's websites. So if somebody could educate me on that, I would appreciate it. What is included in clean energy in the document? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mr. Chong. And I think there is a significant focus in the strategy for Canada's clean tech companies to be able to scale up, to be able to do their first commercial demonstrations in key markets in the Indo-Pacific region. Canada, as you're probably aware, has, I think it's 15 of the top 100 clean tech companies in the globe. And one of the challenges that they've expressed to the government, I think, over many years is for them to be able to scale up and prove their sort of proof of concept in new complex markets in the Indo-Pacific, they need a leg up by the Government of Canada. And I think the strategy will allow companies that do water remediation, companies that do renewables, companies that do solar, companies that do wind. And in fact, the LNG Canada project, which upon its completion, which is very, very soon, will deliver to the Indo-Pacific region the cleanest and lowest emission LNG on the planet, and it will allow many of our partner countries in the Indo-Pacific wean off coal much more quickly.
Thank you, Ambassador, for that answer. So that's a good segue into my next question. As you mentioned, Canada's first large-scale LNG terminal is coming online in Kitimat, British Columbia, sometime around 2025. Just last week, the Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry urged LNG buyers in Japan to secure more long-term LNG contracts for Japan's energy security, but also to ensure that Japan reduces its reliance on Russian LNG. Can you tell us if you've had any discussions or if the government has had any discussions with the Japanese government on Canadian LNG exports to Japan?
You're on mute, Ambassador.
I think it's going on auto mute without the microphone being moved. Sorry, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chong. I've had many conversations with Japan at the political and corporate level about the LNG Canada project. Of the 5 partners in the project, Mitsubishi in Japan is a 15% stakeholder. This is a project that they are waiting for with enormous anticipation, and they are extraordinarily pleased that the completion of the project will be well ahead of schedule for a couple of reasons. Of course, when they signed on to the project, they weren't aware that they would one day have to wean off their Russian supply of LNG. That is happening, and Canada will essentially replace all of the supply that Japan was getting from Russia. But they are just delighted that the Coastal GasLink pipeline has been completed, that the terminal infrastructure in Kitimat is, I think, over 90% completed now. And I suspect that we will be seeing the first test shipments of the LNG into Japan well before the 2025 target date, possibly early 2024. For Japan, it's an extraordinarily important solution to their energy security vulnerability. Japan relies to an unhealthy degree, I think, on imported energy. And this particular project gives them much comfort that is coming from a reliable, friendly partner who will be delivering to Japan, to Malaysia, to Korea, the cleanest, lowest emission LNG on the planet.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chong. We'll now go to Ms. Yip for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome to all the witnesses. Recently, some of us on the committee went on the trip to Washington, and I think all of us learned a lot. And I'm sure all of us also have a lot of questions. And my question today is to the ambassador, what are the differences between Canada and U.S. Indo-Pacific strategies, and as it relates, and how does it relate to China?
Again, Ambassador, I think you're being automatically muted. There we go.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. I mean, I think the first distinction that has to be made is that Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy is a Canadian strategy, and it was built with Canadian interests in mind, with Canadian geopolitical realities in mind, and with a focus on what Canada wants to do for our businesses, for our students, for our citizens, with respect to the fastest growing economy in the world. While the pillars that I outlined earlier, security, trade, people-to-people exchange, climate, and diplomacy, vary a little bit from that of the U.S. Strategy, I think it's important to underline that on the security piece, Canada's deployment through the Canadian forces, through our naval operations and our Air Force operations, we are doing more on the security piece by sending 3 frigates into the Taiwan Strait, into the South and East China Sea, more to monitor illegal ship-to-ship transfers towards North Korea, more to disrupt and intercede illegal fishing, which is happening at an enormous scale in the North Pacific and in towards the Central Pacific. We're doing more than any G7 or, in fact, NATO country that is not called the United States. And I think that comes as a surprise to a lot of Canadians, but it certainly comes as a very, very welcome initiative by our partners in the region, including the commander of the U.S. 7th Fleet, who operates the largest forward deployment naval operation on the planet out of Japan. Their gratitude and Japan's gratitude for our persistent, ongoing broadening and deepening of our military engagement in the region has been widely noted, and it has been extraordinarily well received. And so I think that's just one of the ways in which we are putting action into the plan. And it's important. It's important for global trade in the region that the Taiwan Straits are maintained as international waters. You will have seen on the news through the CBC and the global news crews that were embedded with our Navy and Air Force operations in the region that people are taking notice. Our aircraft have been buzzed. Our frigates have been sidelined by large naval presence from the Chinese. So I think when we're getting their attention by doing what we know is the right thing, it only doubles down the reaffirms the notion that we are doing the right thing by working with our partners in these multilateral exercises in the region.
Great. I did not know that we were doing more than other countries other than the United States, because my next question was to ask how can Canada strengthen our presence in that Indo-Pacific region. Do you feel that there is more that we could do?
I think there's more that we can do over the lifetime of this strategy. You know, I know it has in fact been a year since the launch of the strategy. But of course, because there are significant resources that are being committed to the strategy, it does take time for the process of Parliament and budgets to be allocated. But where there's more for us to do, it covers all of the pillars. There's more we can do on security, and we're doing a terrific job. There's more we can do on trade by being a leading partner in the CPTPP, which is strengthening supply chain resilience throughout the Indo-Pacific region. There's certainly more we can do on people-to-people exchange. I want to see more young Canadians take up language, take up expertise, study the history, the culture, the trade, the politics of this region, so that our bench strength, if you will, as a country over the next decades and generations is much more sophisticated and much more expert at the goings on in the region, which will be the most important economic region in the world. There's more we can do on climate. Some of the extraordinary effects of climate change on the Pacific Island nations, for example, is something where Canada will engage. You know, there are countries that are literally at risk of not existing anymore if there is something isn't done to shore up their shorelines through coastal degradation mitigation. There's more we can do on diplomacy, and Canada will be staffing up a number of its missions in the region, again, to build up the expertise on security, on trade, on politics in the region. And I think that's a good thing. And I think it's a signal of a major, once in a generation or more, a shift of Canadian foreign policy that will require all of those pillars to be executed to their maximum potential.
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll now go to Mr. Bergeron, usually 2.5 minutes, but we have a little bit of extra time, so if you went 3, it wouldn't be a bad thing. There you go.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Vous avez dit, Excellence.
You've said, Your Excellency, that the Indo-Pacific strategy was developed to react to the rise of China from an economic and political and military point of view. Within this Indo-Pacific strategy, it says Canada will continue dialogue with China to pursue Canada's national interests in areas where we can deepen agreements, and we will call on China, in particular, if it adopts a coercive approach on the economic side of things, or if it overlooks its human rights obligations or compromises our national security interests or the national security interests of our partners in the region. Once again, words matter. I think I can state here that China is already adopting certain questionable conduct when it comes to the economic side of things, political side of things, and also when it comes to national security and the safety of our pilots in the region. So how are we going to call on China to react within that type of situation?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Bergeron. It really is at the core, I think, of the formation of the strategy. I think Canada has said fairly explicitly that we will, with regards to our relationship with China, we will compete where we compete, we will collaborate where we collaborate, and we will challenge on issues of human rights and economic coercion where we think that the lines are being crossed. I think we do compete. I think it's very, very important for our exporters, our Canadian small and large businesses, that we're able to maintain good export numbers to China. I think we need to do everything we can to make those channels stay open and stay secure and stay resilient. The fact is, we have a lot of things that China needs and wants. And even through the most difficult times of our relationship, our exports on average have gone up to China. I think that's a real testament to our exporters of all sorts of goods, agri-food, agriculture, seafood, and other export products. The collaboration with China is very important. We need to collaborate on climate-related solutions. I think Minister Guilbeault's visit to China recently was a very, very strong demonstration of Canada's willingness and responsibility to collaborate with China. Climate change is a big issue for them domestically, as you very well know. And I think the more that we can do together to make climate change in sync with economic opportunities between both countries is very, very, very important. But as you raised, there are issues where Canada needs to challenge China. There are significant human rights issues where we have disagreements, and economic coercion issues where we not only have disagreements, but we have an obligation through the Indo-Pacific strategy to be more to diversify our economic integration with other partners in the region. It's not a comfortable position to be some of the smaller countries in the Indo-Pacific if your reliance on your economy is significantly overweighted to China when there is opportunities for coercion to take place. And in that context, it's very important for Canada to have deeper, more integrated economic relationships with partner countries throughout the region. And the CPTPP is a terrific example of how that is happening literally on a daily basis over the past 5 years.
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll have to now go to Mr. Boulris to finish our work with this panel. Mr. Boulris, you've got, let's say, about 3 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd just like to ask, within the framework of the Indo-Pacific strategy, which action is going to be taken so that the federal government can actually reinforce diplomatic and economic links with countries in the region? Which measures are going to be taken? Which resources are going to be allocated also?
Thank you for the question. Certainly, Pillar 5, the diplomatic uplift that Canada will be undertaking in the Indo-Pacific region, and Mr. Epp will have more details on the numbers, but I think it's between 100 and 120 strategically trained and placed and positioned diplomats in the region, including a lot of diplomats with more expertise on, frankly, China, not just to work in China, but to work in other missions across the region. I think this is, in order for the strategy to succeed to its fullest potential, we need to have more better trained, linguistically, culturally, politically, diplomats throughout the region, and not just from Global Affairs Canada, but from other government departments who have significant responsibilities, significant engagements in the region on energy, on climate, on trade, on security. And I think the outlook for the next several years to have a significant uplift in our numbers in the region will pay enormous dividends for decades to come.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to put this question because Canada is part of the G7 and we have a certain influence and weight, but we're not one of the giants on the planet. We're not a real heavyweight, even if we have some weight. So with this Indo-Pacific strategy that you've developed, how will that contribute to the fact that Canada can make a positive contribution to peace and stability within this region of the world?
I thank you for a terrifically important question. And you contextualize it saying Canada is not a heavyweight in our engagement with the G7 or G20 or CPTPP. I think one of the charms and one of the the success factors of Canada in the global context is that we don't come across as a superweight. We come across as a country, and I hear this I've met, I think, 14 presidents and prime ministers in the Indo-Pacific region over the past 6 months. We come across as a country that will listen, that will engage, sometimes that will translate some of the dialogue that's going on between some of the heavyweights, if you will. I think Canada's approach, our diplomatic approach, our position in the world is very well received as a rational partner, as a partner who understands the position and the context of so many of our partners in the region. I think we're very, very well positioned. And we're lucky to be in these global fora, in APEC, in the most impressive trade framework in the region, in the G7. And we use our platforms there, I think, in a very effective, very responsible, very understanding way that is very, very well received by our partners with whom we engage who are not part of those dialogues. And I think that is a terrific strength that Canada brings to the table. I've witnessed it firsthand, and I've heard it from political leaders throughout the Indo-Pacific numerous times over the past 6 months.
Thank you, Ambassador McKay. This brings us to the end of our first panel. I imagine that you're ready for at least your second cup of coffee this morning. It's what, about 6:30 in the morning there? Something like that?
It is indeed.
It is. All right. Well, thank you for your time. It's time well spent for us, and I hope it has been for you. And we'll look forward to your ongoing work. Thank you. We will suspend for a few minutes while we set up our next panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
back to our second session now. Calling the meeting to order to welcome our witnesses for the second panel. Mr. Kimmich has joined us now. That's good to see. From the Department of National Defense, we have Cale Oberwarth. Is it Cale? Good, excellent. Director General of Operations Strategic Joint Staff. Gregory Smith, Director General International Security Policy. And from the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, Sarah Estabrooks, Director General Policy and Foreign Relations, and Newton Shortiff, Assistant Director Collection. Oh, gosh, I hope we don't owe you anything here. Wow. All right. Each department will have up to 5 minutes to deliver opening remarks, and I understand Mr. Smith will lead with you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, we're honored to appear before you. As stated, I'm Major General Greg Smith, Director General International Security Policy, and I'm joined by my colleague, Brigadier General Cale Oberwarth, Director General of Operations for the Strategic Joint Staff. Thank you for this opportunity to support the committee's discussion on the Indo-Pacific strategy and provide an overview of the progress made by the Department of National Defense and Canadian Armed Forces in the implementation of our initiatives and our activities in support of the Indo-Pacific strategy.
Among the 5 interconnected pillars identified in the Indo-Pacific strategy, the Department of National Defence and Canadian Armed Forces are primarily focused on the peace, resilience and security pillar, but we also have an important supporting role to play in the active and engaged partner pillar.
That prior to the release of the Indo-Pacific strategy, Canada already had a significant regional presence, including an over 70-year commitment to the United Nations Command in the Republic of Korea, regular ship and aircraft deployments in support of forward presence operations and sanctions monitoring, participation in major regional exercises, and capacity building activities through our military training cooperation program. Through new and significant investments announced under the Indo-Pacific strategy, the defense team has moved forward to broaden and deepen its presence in the region and position Canada as a positive contributor to peace and stability in the region. In fact, we have aggressively leaned forward on our 5 lines of effort to implement the strategy. Thus, so far, number 1, les forces.
The Canadian Armed Forces has augmented Canada's naval presence in the Indo-Pacific from 2 to 3 warships per year. Earlier this year, His Majesty's Canadian ship, Montreal, was deployed from the Canadian Forces Base Halifax to conduct operations in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, and His Majesty's Canadian ships Ottawa and Vancouver are completing their deployment in the region, working with our allies and partners. Their contributions in upholding the rules-based international order have been well noted across the region, specifically when HMC ships Montreal and Ottawa conducted 3 Taiwan Strait transits in company with the U.S. Navy.
Increased and diversified our regional engagements by participating in new multilateral exercises, with the Royal Canadian Air Force joining for the first time Exercise Mobility Guardian across multiple locations in the Indo-Pacific this summer. As well, the Royal Canadian Navy participated in its first exercise Sama Sama, led by the U.S. and Philippine Navy. Nous avons entendu.
We have expanded our capacity building efforts through new programs and activities, with discussions underway to identify other relevant opportunities with regional partners. Notably, the Canadian Armed Forces co-hosted a Women, Peace and Security Conference with the Malaysian Armed Forces, one of the focus areas for capacity building and security cooperation efforts. As well, the Royal Canada Navy supported capacity building efforts during the multilateral Southeast Asia Cooperation and Training exercise called CACN that was led by Singapore. These activities are important in building interoperability and trust with regional partners.
The defense team established and staffed the 4 defense policy advisor positions in the region, with candidates already at post and integrated with our missions abroad. These new positions, located in Tokyo, Singapore, Canberra, and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., will have an immediate impact on deepening key partnerships and raising Canada's visibility in regional discussions on sensitive defense and security issues. 5. Finalement, les
5. And finally, the defense team co-hosted with its U.S. counterparts a cyber defense cooperation workshop with the Japanese Self-Defense Force focused on cyber incident responses and workforce development to improve their ability to detect and respond to threats. These activities strengthen overall resilience and general preparedness, protecting against coercive tactics and preventing theft of valuable intellectual property.
Pacific strategy, the defense team will maintain this level of engagement, including the deployment of 3 warships, while leveraging the relationships we've strengthened during this first year to deliver an expanded range of capacity building and security cooperation programs. As we deliver on our initiatives, the defense team is concurrently supporting the Indo-Pacific Strategy's objective to be an active and engaged partner in the region by focusing our activities, engagements, and port visits to ASEAN countries, including the Philippines, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam. These efforts, among those across the whole of government, have contributed to tangible outcomes in support of our ASEAN-related objectives, including invitations to observe, for the first time, ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, or ADMM Plus, experts working group meetings and activities in 2023. In concrete terms, these activities directly support our strategic partnership with ASEAN and complement whole-of-government efforts to strengthen our presence in the region and increase our cooperation with ASEAN partners to deliver on the defense and security objectives outlined in our Indo-Pacific strategy.
With that, I'll have to interrupt. We're a little bit beyond our 5 minutes, but you'll have opportunities, I'm sure, to answer questions, work in anything else that you weren't able to get to. We'll now go to Mr. Shortliff for 5 minutes or less.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Newton Shortliff. I'm the Assistant Director of Collection at the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, meaning I'm responsible for all the regions and the collection of intelligence. And I'm joined by my colleague, Sarah Estabrooks, Director General of Policy and Foreign Relations. I'm pleased to join you here today to speak on behalf of the service on this topic, and I look forward to addressing your questions. As a partner to Global Affairs Canada, CSIS is an integral contributor to the successful delivery of the Indo-Pacific Strategy. The strategy rightfully acknowledges that enhanced engagement in the region must include measures to safeguard Canada's economic security, our democratic institutions, and our population. Through the fulfillment of its national security mandate, CSIS is committed to the protection of Canada and Canadians while also helping the Government of Canada meet its foreign policy objectives. CSIS is actively engaged in countering the breadth of complex threats to Canada emanating from the Indo-Pacific region, including in the form of foreign interference, espionage, cyber-enabled threats, disinformation, and misinformation. Through our investigations and intelligence analysis, CSIS supports Government of Canada decision-making in relation to these threats. The SRS s'efforce également.
CSIS also strives to strengthen its relationships with regional partners and traditional allies. In so doing, it enables Canada to engage more effectively and securely in the Indo-Pacific region.
The Indo-Pacific region is vast, the threat complex, and the opportunities limitless. Canada must be aligned with key partners to advance its ambitious regional agenda. The service contributes to this by leveraging its intelligence partnerships. When synchronized with other Government of Canada efforts, these additional challenges of communication and coordination can have a force multiplier effect in the protection of Canadians and Canadian interests. The SRS
CSIS focuses primarily on the promotion of peace, resilience, and security. However, the information and intelligence available to CSIS can guide action on the 5 strategic objectives set out in the strategy.
While there are some limits on the level of detail I can discuss today, I'll be pleased to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shortliff. We'll now go to our first round of questioning, and we'll begin with Mr. Chong for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just last month at the APEC summit, the U.S. and the PRC agreed to resume military-to-military communication. My question is, what is the nature and extent of Canada's military-to-military communication with the PLA, if any?
Mr. Chair, I'll take that one, please. Relatively limited. We have a PRC defense attaché here in Ottawa, Senior Colonel Liu. I speak to him regularly, sometimes via demarches. And equally within Beijing, we have our military connection there as well. But that's about how extensive it is right now.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that answer. As you know, there are two resupply ships being constructed. Canada currently has one. Can you tell us that ship? I understand that supply ship was sent with the HMCS Ottawa and Vancouver, I believe, earlier this year. So a couple questions. First, how is a single resupply ship limiting our ability to project force, not just in the Pacific region, but in our Atlantic region? And secondly, can you tell us about any planning for 2024 operations concerning frigates and the resupply ship Asterix in the Pacific region?
So, Mr. Chair, thank you very much for the question. So at this time, the Asterix is operating in the Indo-Pacific region, has done quite well over the last few months in that space. In fact, they've just come off of Annual X, which is a large exercise including a number of our regional partners and allies, where it has worked not just with Canadian vessels, but also with multinational partners. It's a hugely valuable asset and resource to have in the region. Certainly not just as a measure for refueling and
Pardon me. Quick question. Who's handling resupply for our Pacific fleet right now?
So are you referring to the Canadian Pacific Fleet?
Yes.
Yes. So at this time,
for Canada's Atlantic fleet. Like, who's handling resupply for Canada's Atlantic fleet?
So
if the Asterix is in the Indo-Pacific.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So at this time, the way we manage the travel of these vessels is dependent upon how we can resupply them. So what we will do is we'll naturally use ports of call to refuel vessels if they don't have a mothership to go to. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So and can you tell us about anything, what the plan is for next year with respect to Royal Canadian Navy operations in the Indo-Pacific region? Whether the current operations will extend into next year?
So thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So yes, in keeping with the Indo-Pacific strategy, we're looking to continue the level of engagement in the region that we currently have. I can't speak to the nature of engagements that we will have, but I can tell you that we're going to have a similar level of contribution.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for CSIS, Mr. Chair, and public safety more broadly. In the departmental plans for next year, this year, going into fiscal year end of March 31st, 2024, Public Safety Canada said it will advance implementation of initiatives to support the promotion of peace, resilience, and security in the Indo-Pacific. My question is, will Public Safety Canada and CSIS have any lead under any initiatives in Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy?
So thank you for the question. Our role is to support, as part of Team Canada, the efforts of the Government of Canada as a whole in the Indo-Pacific strategy. So CSIS, for example, is seeking to engage in enhanced relationships with both some of our traditional partners, but also developing new partnerships that will position the service to be able to provide intelligence to the Government of Canada that will assist with its overall objectives. So it's very much a Team Canada approach that we are part of.
Is CSIS or Public Safety Canada taking any lead on any of the initiatives in the Indo-Pacific strategy? I ask because on page 15 of the strategy, it says Canada will ensure Canada's national security and law enforcement agencies are appropriately tasked and resourced to support the objectives outlined in the strategy and work in a coordinated fashion to ensure Canada's public safety and the security of Canadians. So I'm wondering if public safety and CSIS are taking the lead on that part of the strategy, or who's taking the lead if it's not public safety or CSIS?
So we are taking the lead in developing the relationships with our intelligence partners in the region that will support the overall objectives of the Government of Canada. Now, the process is the overall guidance of the strategy, the implementation strategy, is coordinated by Global Affairs Canada, and CSIS and public safety participate in that forum with them as we seek to develop
Can you tell us
all the way
which security intelligence partners you've met with in the Indo-Pacific region?
A brief answer, if you could, please, sir.
Sorry, I apologize. I didn't quite hear your question.
Can you tell us which intelligence partners you've met with in the region?
That
Not you
I
personally, but the service.
that I cannot speak to in detail. That's in an open forum.
Well, can you just
I'm sorry,
tell
Mr.
us
Chong,
whether-
you are out of time for now.
Please.
I'll go to Mr. Casey for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to start with Major General Smith. You weren't able to finish your opening statement. Go ahead and do that now.
Thank you very much, Chair. En résumé, le ministre de la
So the Minister of National Defence and the CAF are on the right track to ensure that in Canada there will be a significant regional and multiform presence, and on that basis we will be able to promote peace and stability to support our values and national interests. Our commitment to peace and security and resilience in the Indo-Pacific necessarily means there needs to be dialogue with China. While doing that, we are attached to the approach which is laid out in the Indo-Pacific strategy.
Our views differ, and we will cooperate with China where it is in our interest to do so, to find solutions to global issues. As we operate in the Indo-Pacific, the Canadian Armed Forces will always respect international rules and engage responsibly, and we expect others to do the same. I look forward to your questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There's been some discussion both from Ambassador McKay and in response to questions from Mr. Chong with respect to the frigates that have been deployed and the fact that there are now 3. The ambassador also mentioned a supply ship and RCAF planes. My question would be the reaction of the People's Republic of China to this increased presence. Can you speak to that?
Mr. Chair, I'll start, and then perhaps my operational colleague would like to go beyond that, which is we have an extensive presence both via Navy and Air Force, Special Forces, Army assets throughout, and so we're engaged throughout. At times, near China, we have engagements, and the vast majority are safe and professional. Occasionally, they're not, and maybe at that point, I will hand off to my operational colleague.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, as you'll have seen in the media the last few months, there were a number, and we'll say few incidents where there were some unsafe and unprofessional engagements by the Chinese with some of our air forces operating in the region. These are very small by way of percentage of the numbers of engagements. In fact, in most cases, they are very safe and very professional. Thank you.
In your statement, you talked about next year and the deployment of 3 warships. Is that the same 3 that are there now, or what? Is there a plan to augment our presence next year?
Chair, I don't know exactly which ships. It's the same number of ships, but not the particular ones I can't speak to.
Okay. And you spoke to China's reaction to this presence. What about other stakeholders in the maritime hotspots like South China Sea, the East China Sea, and I think I heard you talk about some passages through the Taiwan Strait as well. So what has been the perception of other players in those areas?
Chair, I'll go for this one. Again, China is obviously the key country that both from an air and a maritime perspective, we've had interactions. They're the main ones. Otherwise, we're largely cooperating in exercises and capacity building throughout the region.
So if I may, Mr. Chair, just add on. So in fact, most of the interactions that we have in the region are very good. I will say that a lot of the partners and allies that we're working with the region are very happy to see us. And this is a great opportunity in a space where there isn't a defense organization like NATO, where Canada can contribute and do partnership work with a lot of other countries in the region. It helps to give them a level of comfort that Canada is paying attention and that we're looking to have some skin in the game as well. So this is a great opportunity for us, and it's a good news story to have so many Canadians operating in the region, certainly as we kind of coalesce around this Indo-Pacific strategy.
I'd like to get you to talk a little bit about RIMPAC. This is something where Canada has had a long-standing presence, and China was a participant there for a short period of time from 2014 to 2018. Can you speak to the circumstances of China being uninvited to those exercises and how their exclusion has affected them, has affected the exercises, I mean?
Mr. Chair, I'm talking to my colleague over here. Actually, we can't. I don't know the details of that. We could take that on notice, or there might be a subsequent witness that could do better with that one.
Yes, if subsequently you do have information you could supply to us in writing, that would be helpful. Thank you.
This is probably for CSIS, and I know that you'll be limited in what you can say, but I would be most interested in your comments to the extent that you can provide, in whatever detail you can provide, in terms of the state of cybersecurity as it relates to the strategy. What are our strengths and where are the opportunities associated with the strategy?
So thank you for the question. Cyber is one of the most persistent and difficult issues that we deal with at this time. It's a tool that is used by adversaries, including our intelligence adversaries, to gain advantage over Canada. So we have a robust response where we work with with our colleagues in CSE and the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity and with other government departments in an effort to both identify what cyber threat actors are engaged, what their targets are in Canada, how they go about doing their attacks, so that we can identify mechanisms to defeat those attacks. CSIS's role in that, as much as anything, is in part to help understand why and what targets cyber actors may be going after. Where we are seeking to expand our energy, our efforts, is to find ways to provide more information to Canadians beyond the federal government, if possible, that will assist Canadians in being able to protect themselves, whether that be private sector, other levels of government. Every level of government is attacked by cyber. Private sector is attacked by cyber. This is a very, very major threat that Canadians face across the spectrum.
Thank you for that. I appreciate your time. Mr. Casey is over. We'll go now to Mr. Bergeron for 6 minutes or less.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us today to further clarify the Indo-Pacific strategy for us. In the strategy, the Canadian government says they want to establish an increased military presence, in particular with the Horizon operation, where there will be a complete presence of the CAF in the Indo-Pacific region. So according to you, sirs, in terms of your naval and Air Force presence, do you think that meets the government's objective? Or do you believe there's still some more additional deployment to be made to really increase our military presence in the region? If that is the case, in this context where, of course, any type of commitment demands resources with the armed forces, and there's a labor shortage, so it's difficult to recruit. And there's also problems of retaining staff. It's a chronic problem. So how do you think you can increase our presence over and above what we've already done in this region? Chair, thank you for that question. I'll kick off, and perhaps my colleague would like to join in as well. The Horizon Operation, that's the operational expression of the Indo-Pacific strategy, and under the 5 pillars. We've seen that things are going well after 1 year. There's other things to be done. We're going to continue to send in other ships. We need to continue with exercises, but we need to build relationships to do more in the region, and also to answer the question about replenishment or a capacity to undertake these efforts. The military part of the Indo-Pacific strategy was drawn up in light of this question of replenishment and the fact that we have certain problems with staffing, but that's why we've got these 5 lines of action. And I'd just like to add something here, Chair. In particular, when it comes to retention issues, over the last few years, we've spent a great deal of time in the regions, in NATO regions in Europe. And for our young soldiers, and also our young Navy cadets, they like to be able to participate in the Pacific region, see something different. It also gives us an opportunity not just to work in a new region with new allies, but also with new partners. So I think that highlighting our Indo-Pacific strategy will really help us to keep our people or increase interest in the Canadian Armed Forces. When it comes to the air and naval operations in the Taiwan Strait, have led to some incidents with the Chinese Armed Forces. How would you describe these so-called intimidation exercises towards our pilots, amongst other actions? And to what extent have these intimidation operations actually endangered perhaps the lives of our staff, and also called into question peace and security in the region? Thank you, Chair. We have to always remember that our forces are very professional. So we've got tactics, techniques, and procedures that we follow to help us to manage this type of situation where the Chinese armed forces are carrying out dangerous maneuvers. So every time this type of event arises, we learn from it. We draw lessons from this, and we discuss it together to make sure that in the future we can reduce the threats to us as a result of these maneuvers coming from the Chinese armed forces. Thank you. Now turning to CSIS, Mr. Vigneault shared with us the need, or perhaps the fact that it would be appropriate to modernize the CSIS Act, and how would modernization of this Act allow us to make sure that this organization is more effective in fulfilling its mission within the Indo-Pacific strategy, namely to ensure the security of Canada? Thank you for that question.
This Act will assist in a number of different ways. As I mentioned earlier, we're seeking to develop the means to provide, whether it be cybersecurity or other threats to Security Canada, the ability to provide information to Canadians. Some of the measures that we're seeking are improvements to our Act that will allow us to more easily share information and provide briefings to other levels of government, which right now are quite constrained under the CSIS Act beyond the federal level, but as well as possibly to the private sector and elsewhere where there are threats. In addition, we are looking for improvements that will allow for improved ability to investigate different kinds of threats that will increase the speed with which we are able to provide intelligence to the Government of Canada. So the CSIS Act is quite old. It's no longer fit for purpose. It was written in 1984, and notwithstanding some modernizations or some changes that have been made, we find it does not keep pace with current technological reality. One of the things that we're looking for and we're consulting Canadians on is the idea of perhaps reviewing it every 5 years, for example, in order to ensure that we do keep up with technological change and with changes in society, so we don't end up in a situation where we're unable to do quite logical things that we think most Canadians would think we should be able to do easily. So the modernization wasn't written specifically for the Indo-Pacific strategy, but it will definitely assist our ability to participate and to support the Government of Canada's objectives in the Indo-Pacific strategy if successful. And perhaps I can invite my colleague to make a couple of comments.
Very, very briefly, if you could, Ms. Estabrooks.
I think it's valuable to point to the sophistication of the threat actors in that region and the fact that the democratic and norms that we adhere to and value as Canadians are not shared universally. And so we look for modernization of our authorities in order to really build authorities and powers that respect the values of Canadians, but that help us to counter incredibly complex and sophisticated threat actors. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Mr. Bergeron. We'll now go to Mr. Bulris for 6 minutes or perhaps a little more.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to the witnesses who have come before us today to talk about these extremely important issues. Many Quebecers and Canadians are concerned about cyber security matters and the attacks, the increasing attacks in this area against national security and also against citizens' own interests. So I'd like to hear a bit more about that and hear about measures within the Indo-Pacific strategy. Which measures are included to deal with these cyber threats and guarantee cybersecurity for the federal government and also for Quebecers and Canadians as a whole? I imagine that's a question for me, for CSIS.
So on cybersecurity, as I mentioned, this is something that we work with our partners on. In terms of specific measures that Canadians and Canadian companies can take to protect themselves, I would recommend that the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity is the entity that is most appropriate to direct such questions to. The CSIS role is to understand what targets threat actors might be and why threat actors might be seeking to target different parts of Canadian society, why they would be targeting different departments, different levels of government, which sectors in the economy might be targeted and why. And we provide intelligence to our government partners to inform the decision making that is then made in terms of response. But the response does ultimately lie with others. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour.
Thank you for that answer. You've referred to partnerships. So what is the state of play with Canada's partnerships with regional actors to improve this cybersecurity that's so important for everyone?
What I can say about that is there is great interest on the part of our counterparts throughout the region, our allies and the various organizations that we're seeking to improve our relationships with. In speaking with my colleagues in other government departments, they also find great interest on the part of their counterparts in understanding the cyber threat, especially the cyber threat that comes from certain countries, China being the largest threat that all of us face, and finding means to confront it. Thank you.
You've just got a very, very brief time for a very brief question, Mr. Bulris.
Dans quel domaine?
So, in which area within cyber security are we well equipped, and what is one of the aspects where we need to have more resources? Not to say that we're weak, but an area that we really need to pay attention to.
So cybersecurity or cyber threats cross the spectrum in terms of the where we see it, but where it is probably most significant or of greatest concern right now would be in terms of economic security, but also possibility of using cyber tools for impacting, for example, our democratic freedoms, the integrity of our institutions. So those are the areas where we tend to be most focused right now. But it is a really broad threat that touches almost everything.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to our second round, and we're beginning with Mr. Chong.
Yes.
Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to finish up the question I had earlier for representatives from CSIS. The Indo-Pacific strategy mentions that Canada will enhance and bolster Canada's long-standing collaboration with the Five Eyes. It also mentions that Canada will make meaningful contributions to the region's security with regional partners and allies. Does the government intend to expand our intelligence relationship beyond Five Eyes in the region?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for answering that. The question I now have concerns legislation, Canadian law. You mentioned that you believe that there needs to be updates to the CSIS Act to better equip CSIS to respond to the current threats we are facing. I'm wondering if you also think that an additional tool required is a foreign agents registry. As you know, the government is undertaking consultations about this. It's announced that it intends to introduce one at some point. Do you believe that you need a foreign agents registry like Australia and the United Kingdom and the U.S. have had for some time?
Thank you for the question. I believe a foreign agent registry will help. It will provide information that CSIS and other entities can use to help identify threat actors and to differentiate from those who might not be engaged in threat actors. But I wouldn't want to comment beyond that.
Okay, thank you. I have a question now for our representatives from our armed forces. This month, Estonia accused a PRC ship of damaging an underwater gas pipeline and 2 data cables. Most of the world's internet and data traffic travel over submarine cables. There is a major cable that goes from Port Alberni to Japan that carries a lot of data traffic. And I'm wondering whether or not, in your professional opinion, we have the submarine capacity to monitor threats to our submarine cables. As you know, we have 4 diesel battery-powered subs that are nearing the end of their lives. And to my knowledge, we have no autonomous submarine capacity in the Royal Canadian Navy. Yet we face these threats. So I'd like your analysis about whether or not we are equipped to monitor threats to our submarine infrastructure on our coasts.
Mr. Chair, that's a far-ranging question. There are hundreds of thousands of kilometers of undersea cables, of course, and I don't know if there's any country in the world that can monitor that.
Well, but just to be clear, I'm not talking about monitoring it in the mid-Pacific where anchors are not going to drop thousands and thousands of feet. I'm talking about monitoring it in our own maritime waters where the threats are the greatest, as we saw recently in the Baltic Sea.
No, thank you, Chair, for that precision. And then equally, I'm actually, in my technical expertise, I'm an Army person. I don't know if a submarine is the best thing to actually monitor those either. I would just say it's a very large problem, and obviously the fact that it's happened several times within the Baltic Sea recently illustrates the sheer challenge of what we're dealing with right now.
But I guess my question is: Are we prepared for monitoring the threats that Finland and Estonia and other states in the region have faced because of the severing of these cables and pipelines.
Mr. Chair, I just reiterate it's a very big challenge. We have some assets that can help in that, but it's something we're working with all partners to deal with. It's a very emerging challenge, something NATO's dealing with, and as we can see, based on the threats and what's physically occurred recently, it's a very topical problem.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chong. We will now go to Ms. Damoff for 5 minutes or less.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here. My question's actually for CSIS. We've talked about cybersecurity and foreign interference. I'm wondering if you could tell us how you fit into it versus CSE. Because I know Canadians often get confused and assume that you're doing the same work, but you're not. So can you just put some clarity on how that's working in the Indo-Pacific strategy specifically?
Thank you for the question. So we are not doing the same job as CSE. So CSIS is using its own mandate to investigate the kinds of cyber actors that we see engaged in activity that pose a threat to security Canada. We are working to understand what they are targeting and why. And within the extent of our mandate, we then work with CSE. If there's any measures that we can take to help reduce the threat under our mandate, we will do so, and to communicate that to Government of Canada. The difference is CSE. Now, CSE has responsibility through the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity to, for example, develop the policies the Government of Canada has that will help protect our electronic systems. And they have the responsibility for mitigation measures and taking the actions that might be required if there is an event or an intrusion. Our role, and we work very closely with CCCS and the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. I should be careful about acronyms. And with CSE, when there's an intrusion, we'll often work very closely together in our mandates to understand what is happening and to contribute to the Government of Canada's understanding. But it is quite different, and we have different tools that we can use in Canada. For example, we can run operations that will help provide access to information that CSE might not be able to get on its own when it comes to threats to Canadians.
And I just realized we use a lot of acronyms. What does CSE stand for?
Oh, yes, the CSE.
I started it, not you.
That's fine. The CSE is the Communications Security Establishment. It is Canada's national signals intelligence agency.
And they're based more with D&D. My understanding was always CSIS was in Canada. CSE could do things more abroad.
So I should be careful because I don't want to speak for CSE.
No, I know.
But certainly they're a signals intelligence agency. They work very closely with their foreign partners within the Five Eyes in particular, but other foreign partners as well. Their law does require them to be externally oriented. My understanding is that their ability to conduct any kind of activity in Canada is extremely circumscribed by law.
To Mr. Cormier for the rest of the time.
Merci. Ma question pour Monsieur Smith.
I have a question for Mr. Smith or Mr. Oberwart. You said that the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces seem to appreciate this strategy and being part of this strategy, but I think you also mentioned that perhaps there's a lack of human resources or equipment. Perhaps I haven't correctly understood that, but perhaps there's a lack of something that is holding you back. Could you give us a bit more information on that? Chair, I'll start. I was talking about replenishment, but basically that means that after the pandemic, we were down by around 10,000, and the Chief of Defence Staff had talked about this, and now we're trying to get new people in. So the Indo-Pacific strategy was created and the Canadian Armed Forces aspect was drawn up, bearing in mind the fact that there's a certain lack of resource at the moment. Now, in terms of the strategy, do you think there's something that needs to be improved? What do you think could be improved in terms of what you're doing under this strategy? Thank you for that question. I'm not ready to say that something needs to be improved because it only came into effect and we only started on the 26th of November. We've got 3 ships that we've sent out in the last year. But of course, relationship building takes time. Setting up drills or exercises, do we do it on an annual basis with countries? Then there's the question of partnerships and capacity building. That's going to take several years. It is a 5-year strategy. We've got funding for 5 years. And once that's come to an end, we can review that because after each event, we have a review to make sure things are working well.
We will now go to Mr. Bergeron, and again, about 3 minutes, sir.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Chair. So we finished off the whiskey war with Denmark and the Han Island, but now, more seriously speaking, China wants to be an Arctic power. That's their claim. And together with Russia, they could constitute a threat to Canada. And to make things even more complicated, our main ally doesn't fully recognise Canada's sovereignty over the Arctic. So in that rather troubled situation, do we have the right resources to affirm Canada's sovereignty over the Arctic? Chair, I'm not an expert in everything. I'm not an Arctic expert, but we do have resources to participate in events up Nunavut. For example, that's a big sovereignty exercise underway where we actually show our presence in the north. Now, Chair, I could also share something else. We're also working with our allies in this region. Each year over the last few years, we participated in the Joint Pacific Multinational Readiness Centre. This is an exercise which took place in Alaska, and Canada has participated in this exercise together with our U.S. allies, the land forces. Often when we're talking about the Indo-Pacific strategy, we think about planes and ships, but here there was participation with soldiers and also with the air forces. And as the General Smith already mentioned, we use these exercises such as Nunavut to get other allies involved in our exercises in the north so that we can maintain our presence in these locations. Now, to build on what Mr. Chung asked earlier, now we know that a great deal of what's happening in the Arctic is not visible. It happens under the ice. Do we have the right resources, underground resources, to ensure that Canada remains sovereign over the Arctic? Chair, the Arctic, well, it's a very difficult place to carry out operations. We have some capacity to maintain our presence and watch the situation, not just for the military, but for everyone. It's very difficult to remain aware of exactly what's happening. It's a very difficult terrain in which to operate as well. Thank you very much, Chair.
Bergeron, we'll now go to Mr. Bolaris. I believe I actually shorted you in your time last time, sir, so you can go ahead and take an extra question.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I'd like to start by continuing with the line of questioning on cyber security. Canada and the federal government has certain strengths when it comes to defending us against cyber attacks that may come in. But I'd like to hear from our guests, our witnesses from CSIS, and know which aspects you think need more investment or more resources so that we can protect ourselves against cyber attacks from this region of the world. Thank you for that question. Unfortunately, I think you need to put that question to our colleagues in the CSE, and also the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. The service investigates threats that exist in Canada, cyber threats, and we seek to try and understand the threats that exist and the reasons why there are these threats coming from actors. But it's the other institutions that have to deal with this and come up with solutions. So I'd recommend to you to put these questions to the other establishments involved.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'd like to put a question now to national defence, because we're talking about being present, having a maritime presence with our ships in the Indo-Pacific region. So that then begs a question for me, because before we were talking about the fueling ships, we don't have 10,000 frigates nor refueling ships. So do you think we are well enough equipped to do correct refueling of our ships in this region that's pretty far away from us?
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair, for that question. We always have to realize that when we're referring to the Indo-Pacific region, it is a very big region, so we always have to work in an alliance arrangement, a partnership. We use our ship Asterix to support us, but we also use this to help our partners so that when we don't have any ship available, we in turn can use our partners' ships. It's rare that our ship is alone in the region. Often they're part of a big flotilla, and they work with our allies and partners in this flotilla. So that's when we draw up our plans, and that's how we approach this region for the long sails. We really need to make sure that we have that type of refueling ship as part of our overall plan. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. That's all for me just now.
Thank you, and that brings us to the end of our second panel. I'd like to thank Mr. Shortliff, Ms. Esther Brooks, Major General Smith, and Brigadier General Oberwart. Did I just give you a promotion? No.
I'll take any promotion you're willing to give, Mr. Chair, but no, that's fine. Brigadier General is just fine.
Well, listen,
thank you.
Thank you all for your attendance today. We appreciate your testimony. We'll now pause while we get our next panel ready to go.
quite
the Green Bay Packers or something here. I'd like to thank everybody for being here. We have representatives now on our third panel from the Department of Natural Resources. Frank DeRosier, Assistant Deputy Minister of Strategic Policy and Innovation. Andrew Gaddis, Senior Director, Critical Mineral Center of Excellence. From the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Darcy DeMarcio, Director General Blue Economy Policy, Jennifer Bowie, Director General Fisheries Resource Management, Brent Napier, Director Enforcement Policy and Programs. And from the Department of the Environment, Sandra McCardle, Assistant Deputy Minister, International Affairs Branch, Lana Edwards, Acting Director, General Bilateral Affairs and Trade Directorate, and Kelly Tork, Director General Biodiversity Policy and Partnerships. Each department will have 5 minutes, and we'll begin with you, Mr. DeRosier, for 5 minutes or less.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity to speak about the dish of the day, Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. And as you said, I'm accompanied by Andrew Gattis, Executive Director, Lands and Minerals Sector. And the Indo-Pacific region certainly is a strategic one for us. And we have key partners in the region, including Japan, South Korea, and other major players.
Perhaps a bit of data, just to situate us in terms of the sheer importance of the Indo-Pacific region, starting with some trade and investment data in the region. So looking at the most recent data set from 2022, Canadian energy and natural resource export to the region total $44 billion. So not a trivial figure, accounting for 55% of Canada's total export to the region. It does account for 10% of the overall Canadian energy and natural resources export, second only to the United States. Looking at the last 5 years, export to the regions are up 40%. And looking at the future, 2030, according to the Asian Development Bank, the region is expected to consume in the order of 40% of global energy. So given the geopolitical context and the climate goals, Canada is ideally positioned to be a reliable supplier of choice for both clean energy and minerals to the region. What do you think of critical minerals and batteries, hydrogen and ammonia, nuclear, forestry, oil and gas, clean tech? There's a lot that Canada can offer in that region. C'est ainsi que dans le cadre de la stratégie Indo-Pacifique,
So within the Indo-Pacific strategy, NRCan is responsible for correctly representing the country's investments when it comes to trade, investment, science and technology and innovation. And having dedicated NRCan staff, we'll have them in Tokyo and Seoul, which will help us deepen both government and business relations.
led a trade mission in the region in Japan back in January of this year. He was accompanied by 20 natural resources firms and indigenous business leaders who were present throughout this mission, which turned out to be very well received indeed by both commercial entities in Japan, as well as senior government officials and ministers. And having an early engagement from indigenous leaders there was certainly something that was noted very positively by our colleagues in Japan. The minister went back to Japan in April to attend a G7 ministers meeting on climate, energy, and the environment. And again, a lot of discussion took place on the margins in terms of the business opportunities there. In terms of models of collaborations in the region, allow me to maybe mention two. Back in May of this year, NRCan and ICED concluded an MOU with South Korea for cooperation in critical minerals, clean energy, and energy security. In September of this year, just a short 2 months ago, the senior cabinet minister Nishimura from Japan came. He's the Minister of the Economy, Trade and Industry, or METI for short. And he came with a very senior level delegation of business leaders to focus in particular on this unleashing of the Memorandum of Cooperation on battery supply chain. And I'm sure you've been tracking some of those investments that follow suit. I understand the committee expressed some interest on critical minerals, so allow me just to say a few words on this topic. So as many of you would know, as esteemed parliamentarians, Canada launched its critical minerals strategy back in December 2022, so not quite a year ago. A $3.8 billion envelope was set aside to look at the full value chain development in this area for both extraction, processing, manufacturing, and end use. And we've been working with our partners and allies, in particular, to advance some of the R&D efforts, notably South Korea, Japan, US, EU, along with others, and also pursue ESG standards to make sure that we have broad adoption of those, not just in Canada, but globally. We've also shown leadership at the IEA, the International Energy Agency, and have been working on other global forums, such as the G7. So allow me perhaps to close, Mr. Chair, by maybe showcasing some recent investment that took place in the space that demonstrate, again, the very real commercial opportunities that we have as a country. LGS, Lucky Gold Star from South Korea, along with Stellantis, made their large-scale investment for a battery plant in Canada. It's a $5 billion investment. POSCO, also from South Korea, and GM have invested $500 million for a cathode materials plant in Quebec. Rio Tinto from Australia made another $500 million investment in Sorel-Tracy in Quebec. E1 Moly Energy, $1 billion investment for a battery and R&D facility in British Columbia. And of course, the LNG Canada Phase 1 facility in British Columbia, which is the largest private sector investment in Canada's history. It's a $40 billion project, includes Mitsubishi, Kogas, along with other foreign investors. And discussions are underway with many other groups for other such investments. So again, it showcases that the opportunities are many.
Thank you very much, sir. We'll now go to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and Ms. DeMarsico.
Chair and committee members. So the Indo-Pacific strategy, the Indo-Pacific area represents an important market for Canadian fish and seafood, with exports totaling nearly $2 billion in 2022. While the majority of Canada's seafood exports to the region go to China, that's $1.29 billion, Canada is party to the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnerships, a free trade agreement with several countries in the region, and Canadian exporters have an interest in expanding access to major economies in the region, such as Japan, South Korea, Singapore, as well as growing markets like Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand. La région Indo-Pacifique.
The Indo-Pacific region also includes nearly two-thirds of the world's oceans and is home to more than half of the world's fishing fleets, which compete for increasingly scarce marine resources. When problems of security, biodiversity loss, and climate challenges overlap, they aggravate and amplify each other.
Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy established a new shared ocean fund, investing $84.3 million over 5 years to combat illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing and improve the health of marine ecosystems in the Indo-Pacific. IUU fishing is a broad term which covers a wide variety of fishing activity and is a major contributor to declining fish stocks and marine habitat destruction, and may be associated with organized crime. Building on Canada's existing efforts to promote healthy and sustainably managed oceans, both internationally and in this region, this fund will advance efforts to strengthen and enforce the rules-based order, to better regulate fisheries and fishing activity, protect fish stocks, and advance ecosystem conservation. To accomplish this, DFO is taking a three-pronged approach to enhance governance, enforcement, and partnerships. Le Fonds pour les Océans Partagés soutient.
The Shared Ocean Fund supports enhanced multilateral engagement at regional fisheries management organizations, where DFO negotiates legally binding and science-based measures for the sustainable management of high seas fisheries and to counter IUU fishing. In August 2023, Canada successfully championed adoption of a full harvest strategy for North Pacific albacore tuna to keep fish stocks healthy. Canada also led the development and adoption of measures to protect sharks at the annual meetings of the 3 Pacific Regional Fisheries Management Organizations. This work is further reinforced through the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN and the Agreement on Port State Measures, PSMA, which prevents vessels engaged in illegal fishing from using other countries' ports to land their catches, therefore keeping IUU fishing products out of national and international markets. Through the Shared Ocean Fund, Canada will seek opportunities to advance the Agreement on Port State Measures implementation through training and capacity building in developing and high-risk states. Canada is actively participating in several international fora to achieve complementary outcomes that allow us to address challenges impacting the state of global fish stocks and ocean resources across the world. For example, Canada's implementation of international agreements such as the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna CITES is an important part of our global effort to ensure trade does not undermine the sustainability of aquatic species. Canada was also an very early ratifier of the World Trade Organization's Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies achieved in 2022 and continues to be actively engaged in these negotiations.
In efforts to combat illegal fishing and protect Canadian interests in the North Pacific, in July 2023, Canada led its first dedicated high seas vessel patrol and fisheries enforcement mission in collaboration with the U.S. and Japan to combat IUU fishing in the North Pacific. Additional aerial surveillance patrols were conducted in the region throughout 2023. DFO's officers documented 58 fisheries violations, including the detection of 3,000 illegally harvested shark fins during foreign vessel boardings and aerial surveillance missions. In October 2023, Canada began a new initiative with the Philippines via an MOU which provides their maritime authorities access to our dark vessel detection space-based surveillance platform, using satellites to track illegal fishing vessels and support maritime security efforts within their sovereign waters. DVD has been deployed since 2021, when Canada first launched efforts to remotely monitor distant water fleets that surround the Galapagos Islands. DFO works with our international partners to develop and strengthen the fisheries management and compliance measures that regulate high seas fishing activity and combat illegal fishing with a robust monitoring, control, and surveillance presence. For example, in September 2023, the Prime Minister announced a $6.5 million contribution to the Joint Analytical Cell, an organization designed to harness complementary information gathering and analytical capabilities, fisheries intelligence tools and databases, and international partnerships to fight against IUU fishing and associated crimes.
Ms. DeMarsico, I'm afraid we've come to the end of your 5 minutes, but I think we may get you to the FOPO committee at some point, because you've been talking about what we've been talking about. We'll now go to the Department of the Environment. Ms. McCardle, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The Indo-Pacific region is essential to Canada's global efforts to address the triple threats of climate change, nature loss, and pollution. Home to both China and India, this region accounts for half the world's population, half the world's carbon emissions, and many of the world's most biodiverse countries. The Indo-Pacific strategy, under its objective of building a sustainable and green future, provides a framework for Canada to advance its environmental priorities with a region critical to the future health of the planet and, by extension, of Canada. Given the global nature of these challenges, engagement with the countries of this region, both bilaterally and in multilateral fora, is essential. Canada has made important progress in implementing Pillar 4 of the Indo-Pacific Strategy through climate finance, support for energy transition, cooperation on biodiversity, and prevention of plastic pollution with the countries of this region.
Recognizing the need to support developing countries in their mitigation and adaptation strategies to respond to climate change, Canada has committed $5.3 billion to international climate finance, and a significant contribution has been made through multilateral funds and bilateral programming to the developing countries of the Indo-Pacific region, in order to assist them in reducing their emissions and adapt to the devastating impacts of climate change.
Meeting global climate goals will require successful energy transitions, and Canada has developed close partnerships with many of the states of the Indo-Pacific to advance key multilateral initiatives. As a founding member of the Powering Past Coal Alliance, Canada has encouraged states in the region to commit to the phase-out of unabated coal. Thus far, the Marshall Islands, New Zealand, Singapore, and Vanuatu, as well as subnational levels in Australia, South Korea, Japan, Philippines, in addition to Taiwan, have all joined the PPCA. We're also partnering with New Zealand and South Korea under the Global Carbon Pricing Challenge to accelerate global climate action and decarbonization. As more countries adopt pricing solutions, the effectiveness increases, driving innovation and reducing emissions. De plus, Le Canada participe.
In addition, Canada participates in the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, an innovative funding model to support countries' transition away from coal in both Indonesia and Vietnam. These multinational efforts are mobilizing tens of billions of public and private dollars for infrastructure investment, policy reform, and inclusive sustainable jobs.
Nature has become ever clearer, Canada has responded to the need for international action. Home to the Secretariat for the Convention on Biodiversity, Canada was host country to COP15 under China's presidency last year. That conference resulted in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and in August, Canada pledged $200 million to the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, making it the first country to do so. Going forward, Canada will draw this fund will assist eligible countries in the region to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. Canada recently launched a Nature's Champion Network and is inviting countries in the region to work with Canada to promote the goals of this biodiversity framework. To address plastic pollution, Canada has worked alongside a number of Indo-Pacific countries, including Australia, the Cook Islands, Micronesia, Japan, Maldives, and many others in a high-ambition coalition to support the development of a new legally binding global instrument on plastic pollution, and will continue to do so in the lead-up to the fourth UN-led negotiation to be held in Ottawa next April. In addition, Canada is working with Indonesia, Vietnam, Pakistan, and Cambodia through national plastic action partnerships to support these countries in meeting their goals to end plastic pollution. Under the Ocean Plastics Charter, launched under Canada's G7 presidency in 2018, Canada is also working with small island developing states, as well as international and regional companies, to prevent waste being released into the environment. To anchor this wide range of collaboration on environmental issues, Canada holds annual environmental dialogues with Australia, Japan, and Korea, and co-chairs the China Council for International Cooperation on Environment and Development. Environment cooperation is also codified in our free trade agreements, including the CPTPP, and we're pursuing commitments on environment as part of our trade negotiations with Indonesia and with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. We use our membership in the G7, G20, and APEC as multilateral opportunities to promote shared environmental goals with key Indo-Pacific countries, including Japan, China, India, Indonesia, and Korea. En conclusion, le travail continu du Canada.
In closing, Canada's ongoing work with the Indo-Pacific region on the triple threat to the global environment provide a strong basis to achieve the sustainable and green future for Canada and the world as envisaged in the strategy. And Canada's work continues to provide a substantive channel of engagement in support of the broader bilateral relationship with the countries in this region. Thank you.
We'll go into our 2 rounds of questioning. I'll hold everybody pretty close to time, though, so we can get the full 2 rounds in. And we will begin with you, Mr. Seaback, for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clean energy is mentioned, I think, 4 times in the Indo-Pacific strategy. Talks about, at least at one point, a reliable supplier of clean energy. Also talks about the movement from unabated coal generation to clean energy. So I'd like to know whether or not the Government of Canada considers LNG to be clean energy within the context of the Indo-Pacific strategy, because we haven't necessarily got a clear answer on that yet today.
So thank you, Mr. Chair, for that question. So we don't have like a set definition or formula for what clean energy is defined, but certainly the government has been very candid and forward in terms of what we aspire to be. In the case of LNG, the goal is very simple, is to aim to adopt the most advanced technologies to have the lowest carbon intensity possible in those emissions. And I'm proud to report that both for LNG Canada and the other projects are being actively considered with fiber and Cedar LNG. We're very much looking to be this way and be truly world leaders in this domain. And I would close by just noting that in talking to customers in Korea and Japan in particular, they do appreciate Canada's positioning there. And as we can see now, the marketplace moving more and more toward such products, it clearly responds well to market needs.
I understand there's lots of countries that want Canadian LNG. That would include Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, for example. But are you saying to me that in the Indo-Pacific strategy that's been developed by the government, there's actually no definition of what clean energy is, which means we don't know if LNG is included in that? I know we're going to export LNG, but when the strategy talks about Canada being a reliable supplier of clean energy, we don't have any definition of what clean energy actually means. Is that what we're saying?
Well, the Indo-Pacific strategy touches on very many issues.
I know. I just want to know if we have a definition of clean energy that the government has enunciated with respect to the Indo-Pacific strategy. If there isn't one, that's fine too.
I doubt very much that every single term laid out in the Indo-Pacific strategy has definition on it, from defense to cultural industries to environment or fisheries and so forth. So, but we certainly have laid out in very clearest terms what we are aspiring to do as a country with regard to our energy policies.
Okay, I don't want to know. I know there's probably lots of terms that aren't defined. I'm not asking about those terms. I'm just asking about this one particular term so that we can understand what we mean when we talk about being a supplier of clean energy and all these other things. When we say that, we don't have a definition of clean energy. If we don't have one, that's fine, but I want to know if we've defined it or the government understands what it means.
So again, that would mean, Mr. Chair, like our intention is to position Canada to be a leader in terms of low carbon energy supplies, and the market response, whether it's on hydrogen, LNG, or other products, has been remarkably strong.
I guess I'm going to take that it hasn't been defined. So with respect to LNG, we know that Japan has asked for it. We know that South Korea has asked for it. We know that, for example, Taiwan has asked for it. We also know that China would be interested. We also know that a lot of LNG is being directed from the Gulf of Mexico to Europe. So has the government made a calculation of what the demand for LNG is in the Indo-Pacific and how much of that Canada could supply?
We've not kind of published per se market studies. We leave that to organizations such as the IEA, who've done extensive studies in terms of market trends in this area. What we do know is, as the member has very correctly pointed out, the demand is quite strong, as many of those countries in Asia are looking to move away from coal, either for power generations or steel making or other such products. So the demand has been strong, and it's been stronger than ever, especially so that further to Russia's attack on Ukraine, the demand in Europe has also spiked. So as one can appreciate, while the capacity that we're deploying now and will be, as you know, operational soon.
But do we know what that capacity is? Like how much we can deploy and how much of the need that will meet? Do we know what that is?
So LNG Canada will have a capacity of 14 million tons, and they're looking to go in prepping for the full operations by 2025. And we have other projects, as you know, are in the wings. So Canada will be a meaningful supplier of LNG to the
But we don't know what the actual numbers are, like how much Canada could supply and how much the Indo-Pacific would need. No one's done that calculation in the government of Canada, to your knowledge.
Again, this kind of studies are being pursued and published and updated regularly by organizations like the AA and private sector organizations. So they're readily available. Canada will never be able on its own to supply the entirety of it, that we know. And that's why countries like the United States and Australia and others are increasing, and the Middle East are increasing such supply to the region. But again, Canada will be well positioned to be a meaningful contributor.
I have very little time, 15 seconds by my...
Well, quickly.
Russia's dumping crab in the Japanese and the Korean market. What's Canada's position on that within the Department of Fisheries? Are we doing anything to try and stop that?
So I will say that, sorry, let me get my statistics out. So Canada is an important supplier of crab in the Indo-Pacific region, and our crab exports were worth $8,996.59 over the last year. And we are certainly seeing that the value of crab is impacted over the last year, which could be from a number of different factors, obviously food prices, inflation, but also geopolitical issues. And so the larger lead on trade issues around food rests with Global Affairs Canada and AFC. We're working very closely with those organizations to raise the issue of access more broadly and of snow crab in particular.
All right, with that, we will go to Mr. Cormier for 6 minutes or less.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mes questions.
Thank you, Chair. I've got questions for DFO staff. So, we've got a 60% contribution based on fisheries, and I've got other colleagues from my region where fisheries is very important as well. And the strategy for the fisheries sector is very significant. We've had lots of discussions about these strategies over the last few years. We export almost 2 billion products, many of these towards China, Japan, and other countries here and there. When it comes to the strategy, I've got some questions that have come up because office has been opened up recently for agriculture and agri-food. I believe that's in the Philippines. But why within the strategy we haven't opened up an equivalent bureau for fisheries, or is there one that's been opened up that we're not aware of? What are you doing actually to promote our exports to countries other than China, for example? When it comes to a bureau or an office, why have you not placed emphasis on a fisheries and aquaculture bureau as well?
Say the Indo-Pacific region is an important market for Canadian fish and seafood, and largely that market, 23% of it, of our total exports. So, and I think it's also an important import source for Canada of $2.47 billion worth. In this context of trade, we work very closely with Global Affairs and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, who lead on this particular pillar of the strategy. As you note, they have expanded trade action into a new office in the Philippines, and we work through them to ensure that fisheries and seafood products are reflected in our trade promotion exports.
OK, d'accord, mais souvent, on s'aperçoit quand on a un bureau qui fait la...
Yes, often, but when there's an agricultural promotion bureau, agriculture is the priority, and that's fine, we accept that, but there needs to be something for fisheries. We're talking about 2 billion exports from fisheries, so do you not think that we should have a counterpart, an equivalent bureau for fisheries and aquaculture, which could be opened up somewhere in one of these countries, and that could be included in the overall Indo-Pacific strategy? Do you think it would be important to have this type of bureau for fisheries and aquaculture, which would be equivalent to what we already have for agriculture?
Next, there's a lot of efficiencies and gains that can be done by having a very strong Canadian brand for sustainability, and I hope that our fish and seafood sector are an important part of that Canadian brand, and I think we'd want to be engaged in that larger effort more broadly.
D'accord, donc...
Okay. I'll go to another question. In the strategy as well, and here I'm going to look at certain initiatives that we want to undertake. We want to share our expertise when it comes to management and protection of our oceans. Now, I don't want to be critical necessarily, but it's such an important sector for me, fisheries, that I want this to work. We've said we want to share expertise when it comes to stock management, but just a few weeks ago, we had the Commissioner for the Environment who said that the DFO unfortunately didn't have any reliable data, and unfortunately did not have any data about certain fish stocks in terms of their recovery. So we're part of this Indo-Pacific strategy to promote what we're doing well, but perhaps we're not doing it well ourselves. So what are you doing in terms of your discussions on this to try and get things back on track and see what we're doing badly here at home? Because if we're wanting to promote the fisheries sector abroad, I think we have to have good management here. There are certain lackings and failings. We're looking at that in the Fisheries Standing Committee. So what are you doing in terms of stock management here in Canada? Charity starts at home, perhaps, before you start preaching about all this abroad with other countries.
Here who can talk to you about the Canadian best practices that are valued by our colleagues in the region.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the excellent question. So you heard a little bit from the opening remarks about dark vessel detection. one of the main areas is to control capacity. And for us on the enforcement side, it's to support our partners. You mentioned, having some resources in the Philippines. In fact, I have 2 officers just returning from the Philippines. We have signed an MOU with the Philippines that will provide them with support in terms of managing fisheries, managing capacity. The Chinese fleet has over 500,000 vessels, in contrast to Canada's 17,000. And so we're learning valuable lessons as we support our partners and using new technology and innovation, both abroad but also domestically.
OK, mais je veux juste faire sûr que vous compreniez.
Well, do you correctly understand my question? We want to promote our good stock management and the right way of doing things that we have here in Canada. But once again, we've got a report that says quite the opposite. So what are you doing to ensure that our industry, our fisheries sector, is taken more seriously and make sure we've got better practices here that could then be beneficial for other countries that we're going to deal with under the Indo-Pacific strategy?
Short response is certainly applying the innovation in tech. So the report itself, and I had the pleasure of being at that committee as well, focused on a very particular part of our work. It didn't focus necessarily full on science and management, but also enforcement. And so we're making strides in all those areas. As we learn and use this technology, marine protected areas, as an example, the Canadian context, we can certainly apply that in both directions, as we have in the Galapagos and as we have in the countries in the Indo-Pac region.
Thank you for that. Mr. Bergeron, it's your turn for 6 minutes or less.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to talk about the Kiwa initiative, a multi-donor one to reinforce resilience to climate change, ecosystems, communities and economies in the Pacific Islands, thanks to nature-based solutions to have sustainable protection of biodiversity. And Canada has made a contribution of around $10 million, if I'm not mistaken. So are there other similar initiatives underway over and above Kiwa in which Canada's also participating? Yes, thank you. I'd like to say that, in fact, it's around $16 million that we're putting into that initiative under Global Affairs Canada, who's managing this project. And the answer to your question is yes. There are other support projects in the Indo-Pacific regions that fall under Global Affairs and also Environment Canada. When it comes to biodiversity specifically, yes, there are other projects for climate finance. We've got other projects with Thailand, for example, and countries such as Fiji to give them the right capacity to manage the effects of climate change and make sure that they can actually adapt to what's happening to them and have some disaster responses.
My colleague Kelly Tork, who is responsible for partnerships on biodiversity. Kelly, would you like to provide a little bit more detail on that one?
Certainly. So just to highlight, as Ms. McCardle referenced in her opening remarks, there is, in fact, a new global biodiversity framework fund that's been established, and that will be helpful at the global level in supporting projects in developing countries to implement the global biodiversity framework that was recently adopted. In addition, in the context of the climate finance funding that Canada provides through Global Affairs Canada and others, a portion of that is supporting projects that are supporting nature-based solutions and or biodiversity co-benefits. And so certainly eligible countries within the region are able to be considered further for those projects.
Je me demandais surtout s'il y avait...
I was wondering whether there are other projects or other multilateral initiatives, such as this one where Canada's participating. But nevertheless, can we imagine, for example, well, why not? Perhaps a state such as Taiwan, could they contribute to this type of initiative, such as the Kiwa initiative, so that we could strengthen our relations with Taiwan or allow Taiwan to be able to strengthen its relations with its neighbors without finding itself in this dynamic of recognition or non-recognition? So would there be a way to kind of circumvent the limitations constrained or that flow from the One China policy? For the moment, we do not have any project with Taiwan. Having said that, we've got certain projects within our climate funding envelope that are pursued with governments at different levels. As I said in my opening remarks, we have projects with sub-regional governments and even with municipalities. So we do not necessarily have to have commitments only with national governments. Excellent, thank you. Now, the visit to the People's Republic of China of the Environment and Climate Change Minister led to a great deal of controversy. And people wondered whether it was the right moment to actually open up the valves for ministerial meetings. And it seemed that the minister came back thinking that perhaps his presence could have allowed for some bridge building and allowed us to make progress in terms of collaboration on climate change strategies. What are the impacts? What is the actual spin-off effect of this visit by the Environment Minister to the People's Republic of China, the tangible impact?
One thing that is clear is that even with countries with whom we may not agree with a great deal, it's important that we engage on questions that affect the globe. Environment is one of those questions. And so our ability to speak to countries with whom we have tense relationships is important.
Je veux surtout pas vous interrompre, mais comme mon...
I don't want to interrupt you, but I've got limited time. I agree with what you've said, but what are the tangible impacts of this visit?
A couple of things. First of all, the visit to China allowed the minister to meet with his counterpart. It allowed him to co-chair the China Council for International Cooperation, Environment, and Development. That was an important session that was attended in its final iteration by the Vice Premier itself to hear exactly the recommendations not only of Canada as co-chair, but of those present, a wide range of countries from our closest partners, the Nordics, the EU, but also the UN Environmental Program, civil society NGOs that were present that offered their very clear recommendations, and some of those included things as clearly as no new coal. So there was an opportunity at a very senior level for China to hear clear messages about expectations around how it will conduct its program to address climate change.
At that, we'll have to interrupt. I'm sorry. We'll have to move on now to Mr. Bolaris for 6 minutes or less.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, before I go into questions, I'd like to admit that I'm quite taken aback by what I've heard from my colleagues from the Conservative Party of Canada, who seem to be feigning ignorance around what constitutes clean energy. Several of them have got a great deal of experience. They participated in many discussions and debates on the environment and climate change. And today, to claim that they don't understand what constitutes clean energy, I think is really pushing the envelope a bit too far. But I imagine it's not the first or the last time that we'll get that from the Conservative Party. Having said that, Chair, I'd like to put a question to the representatives from the Environment Department. Thank you very much for being here today. Could you please explain to us a bit more about how you plan to take our Indo-Pacific strategy and pursue Canada's collaboration with countries in the region when it comes to adaptation to climate change and the deregulation of the climate, and also the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions? This is extremely important for our generation and future generations to come. So what is Canada planning to do with countries in this region to help them to adapt and mitigate and reduce the impacts of climate change?
Clearly, our ability to engage substantively with the Indo-Pacific is critical to how the globe is going to address climate change. You heard my introductory remarks. These are huge emitters, and we need to push them to make a difference in how they behave. At the same time, we need to look at those countries most affected and help them adapt and address their their environmental impacts like rising sea levels. How are we doing this? In a few ways. As I mentioned, we have a large envelope of climate finance managed by Environment Canada and Global Affairs. This is used to support multilateral initiatives, a number of UN programs that are meant to help countries adapt. Some of that is climate finance that's done through multilateral development banks. Some of it's bilateral, again, managed by both departments. And it's really focused on practical measures to help countries adapt. At the same time, we want to make sure that they're taking steps now to reduce their carbon footprint. And that's certainly part of what this programming is going to do. It's also going to be part of what we're trying to achieve at COP28, starting already this week. And so there's a lot of negotiations that have taken place in the lead up to that, where we're working with the biggest emitters, but also on the small countries to be really ambitious so that we can stay within our 1.5-degree goal.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for that answer. Yes, of course, the Indo-Pacific region includes countries that are big emitters of greenhouse gas emissions because they've got enormous populations. When we think about India and China, but when we look at this per capita, Canada were amongst the worst when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions compared to a Chinese or Indian citizen. So we've got plenty of work to do back home in our backyard, because the current government is missing all of its greenhouse gas emission targets. And we are the real laggards when we look at the emissions per inhabitant, per capita. Now, in the Indo-Pacific region, there are certain countries that may actually completely be wiped off the map, such as certain small islands, because of the rise of oceans and melting glaciers. They may find themselves completely underwater, submerged in a few years' time. So what is there in the Indo-Pacific strategy to deal with this impact of rising sea levels on these small countries and on these small islands in particular that are really under threat?
Thanks. Look, there's a couple of things of approaching that. One is, as you've suggested, by working with those smaller countries themselves, and we'll come back to that. But there's also the fact that all of this is tied to one single global environment, and how we can help them best is by helping the entire world achieve the goals that it needs to, the plans that it needs to keep the world within the 1.5-degree warming. So part of what we do is work to make sure that that we are doing what we need to do in Canada, that we are pushing our partners internationally. And again, as I mentioned, that's going to be a big part of what we talk about starting in just a few days at COP. With these countries, some of our funding goes through multilateral organizations, so that can be United Nations Environmental Program, for example, to work with countries to develop plans to help them prepare for and respond to disasters. And some of that is really on some capacity building, and it can be things like working with them on how they treat the methane that comes from their solid waste. So there's a lot of levels that we're working at. And I'll be honest, I think that the Secretary General at the UN said it really well at the General a couple of months ago in September, when he said what we need to do is everything everywhere all at once. And that's certainly an approach that we believe is appropriate.
You only have a few seconds left, Mr. Bolaris. I think we'll move on to our next questioner. Second round, in fact, we'll begin with Mr. Chong, 5 minutes or less.
Thank you. I don't understand how Canada can cooperate with the People's Republic of China on climate change. Last year, the PRC approved the largest expansion of coal-fired electricity power plants since 2015. And presently, China is deliberately, through executive direction from the top, is deliberately increasing the burning of coal. In fact, today, China burns more coal than the rest of the world combined. Last year burnt a record amount of coal, and this year is looking to burn an even greater amount of coal. And so as a result, global coal consumption, which was supposed to peak about a decade ago, according to the International Energy Agency, has not yet peaked. So I don't understand how we can cooperate with the PRC when they are deliberately and massively increasing the most polluting form of fossil energy coal.
Mr. Chair, it is absolutely the case that China is amongst some of the world's is the world's greatest emitter. 27% of GHG, half the production, use of coal in the world. That's absolutely the case. I think fundamentally, though, the only way that we can move China forward is by engaging with China. There is a need to address those who are the greatest emitters and to push them along to address what they need to do. China is at the same time, I think, arguably the largest producer of renewable energy as well, and certainly has been a leader in the development of some of the electric vehicles. So I think there's both on the emitter and on the renewable energy side, reasons to engage with China. I maybe would point out that we've seen very recently the summit between Biden and Xi, and there was the Sunnylands Environment Agreement that came out of that. I think that just demonstrates that even the biggest countries in the world understand that we need to engage with China. We're not going to get there if we don't.
I just take note that last year coal was Canada's top export to the following Indo-Pacific trading partners: Japan, India, the PRC, South Korea, and Taiwan. That was our top export. I want to move on to critical minerals, because in the Indo-Pacific strategy, it mentions that Canada will be a reliable supplier of critical minerals to the Indo-Pacific region. According to benchmark mineral intelligence or research firms, in order to meet the 2035 battery electric vehicle mandates, some 384 new critical mineral mines and plants are needed. According to the U.S. Geological Survey and according to the Government of Canada, Canada has about 2 to 3% of the world's critical minerals. So extrapolating from that, 3% of 384 is roughly a dozen new mines in Canada in order to meet the 2035 goals. And I don't see anything happening on debt capital markets, on equity capital markets, on the TSX. I don't see anything happening with mining companies here proposing new projects that would lead me to believe that we're going to be building and approving 12 new mines here in this country as a part of the 384 mines that are needed. Can you tell us how we're going to meet that Indo-Pacific goal to be a reliable supplier of critical minerals to the region?
So the member is quite right to point out, and there's different sources that would point to the same direction, a very sharp upward trend in terms of the needs for supply of critical minerals. Canada is blessed with very large resource endowment and so many of those critical minerals, and we've given ourselves the means, both in terms of the support for R&D. Just last week, a $1.5 billion envelope was confirmed and rendered public for infrastructure development, which is a major obstacle, as you know, to ensure that those products are available to get to market. And when we look at the engagement by private sector firms, and should any one of you attend PDAC conference in Toronto in March, you'll see literally tens of thousands of expert scientists, geologists, investors flocking to Canada to engage in deal making. So we're actually quite optimistic that the ramp up will occur. Will it be happening fast enough globally? Time will tell. But certainly Canada is pulling its weight and more.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chong. We'll now go to Mr. McDonald for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I know it is a little bit different for you to be giving me time. Normally, I'm giving you time in committee. I want to go back to Mr. Seebeck's point about the definition for clean energy. And I know the people here from ECC says they don't have a description for it or a definition for it, but perhaps if you could go back and ask the Minister for a definition of clean energy and provide that to the committee so as we could look at it and see what it actually means. Also a question on that, it was mentioned $200 million was announced at COP Montreal. Could you tell me what that money has been used for?
Mr. Chair, so the $200 million followed on the COP in Montreal. It was a Global Biodiversity Framework Fund that we contributed a few months later. I'm going to turn to my colleague responsible for biodiversity, Kelly.
Thank you. So, in fact, at COP15, there was $350 million that were announced for Canada to contribute to an international biodiversity program that's going to support developing countries to advance implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. 200 million of that, as was noted, was announced in August as the first contribution to a new global biodiversity framework fund that's being established under the Global Environment Facility. So Canada was the first contributor. That is now an operational fund. There were a couple of additional donors who have now put it at the mark of $200 million US dollars to allow it to be operational. And that will start to disperse funds, hopefully starting sometime next year as it gets operational. In addition to that, the remaining funding will also be identified and is managed by Global Affairs Canada, looking at projects that will support objectives around biodiversity conservation and sustainable use, and very much in line with meeting the objectives of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. That funding will start to flow next fiscal year, so starting in March in April at the earliest. So that's a 2-year funding contribution that will contribute directly to outcomes and results on biodiversity in developing countries.
Okay, is that in the form of a loan or a grant?
It's grants.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. I'll go now to the illegal, unreported, unregulated fisheries. That's a very important topic in Atlantic Canada. And I noticed that there was a Indo-Pacific outcome or a trip or vessel mission that was done. What is being done in Atlantic Canada to curb IUU fishing? It seems to be a large problem. I'm hearing in the shellfish industry it is massive. It is turning into a cash business versus reporting your catch and claiming it as earnings and whatnot. It's a huge problem in Atlantic Canada right now. So what are we doing to try and get a handle on that, to get that kind of activity negated?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the excellent question. I'd mentioned, of course, learning from innovation and tech. So under Indo-Pac, we'll obviously be able to use and learn some of those valuable lessons. But our 500-strong fishery officer cadre, of course, works regularly to enforce through a 500-strong vessel program, through the support of Coast Guard, through the support of third-party monitoring and intelligence. And so absolutely, compliance is of concern, but CNP and the department take it quite seriously, and we ensure that we have proper resources to address those issues.
Okay, thank you for that. I understand there's a lot of cash being used in that particular type of transaction, so you may never catch anyone that's willing to report it or anyone that's going to get caught. So once they get it on shore, they have the ability to sell it for cash. But again, that's another day, I guess, for enforcement to figure out a way to do that. I think that's all the questions I have, Mr. Chair, and if somebody else on this side wants to use the remaining time, they're more than welcome.
How much time's left?
How much time is left?
How much time is left? 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. I'm very generous today.
Yes, thank you. Did anybody want 20 seconds? All right, gone. All right, we will now go to Mr. Bergeron for 2.5 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Avant...
Thank you, Chair. Before the publication of the Federal Indo-Pacific Strategy, Quebec had published a document expressing its ambitions, where Quebec said that it wanted to be present as a green economy in this region and expressed its will to promote sharing of expertise on sustainable development. So has the federal government actually been sensitive to contributions that can be brought from municipalities, provinces, and so on when it comes to developing the Indo-Pacific strategy, in particular from an environmental point of view?
Mr. Chair,
Look, we are absolutely conscious that the effort to address the global environment, we talk about a global effort, and really that all of that effort begins at home. We can't expect to work well with countries abroad if we can't cooperate with our provincial, and territorial municipal governments here. So I referred to COP before, maybe I'll use that as an example, but we do have, in the case of Quebec, a very large delegation that will be part of Canada's delegation at that. There are good channels of cooperation and communication that have opened with all of the provinces and territories who will be participating. So not later than last week, the Deputy Minister of Environment engaged all of his Deputy Minister colleagues to have that kind of open dialogue to explain our priorities and to ask them what their priorities were. So what I would say is that this is an effort that needs to be whole of Canada, whole of society, and Quebec has a strong role to play in that.
Est-ce que j'ai encore un peu de temps, Monsieur le Président?
Do I still have some time, Chair? Okay. So according to, well, I'm just trying to find my notes first. I'm losing my minutes now. So according to analysis from the China Institute of the University of Alberta, state-owned enterprises from the People's Republic of China 10 to 26% of shares in several Canadian mining companies. Do you see this as a threat or a challenge or a problem? Is it going to keep you up at night? So often these enterprises are on public markets, so this ownership aspect is not problematic, but of course there are reviews that are carried when it's a state-owned enterprise under the Foreign Investment Act. That falls under the Department of Industry, and we work closely with them for that type of review to be carried out, and that was the case last year when it came to lithium investments, where there was a policy that was launched by Mr. Wilkinson, Mr. Champagne, both ministers, but certainly we keep a close eye on all of that.
Dr. Rosier, we'll now go to Mr. Bulleris to take us home for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. Two last questions, once again for the officials from the Environment Department. 2/3 of the planet is made up of oceans, and there's a great deal of biodiversity that exists under the water. And in the Indo-Pacific strategy, are there specific measures or plans that have been made to fight against the acidification of the oceans caused by global warming, which could really disturb many very fragile ecosystems that currently exist in the oceans, in particular in the Pacific or in the Indian Ocean? If you allow me, I'm going to give the floor to my colleagues from DFO.
Thank you so much for putting emphasis. Thank you for the question, and thank you very much for putting such an important emphasis on the ocean's role in climate change. And so I will say that in the context of the Indo-Pacific Strategy Shared Ocean Fund, although fighting IUU fishing is the primary work, what we are also looking at is how the Shared Ocean Fund can support biodiversity and sustain ocean ecosystems, including in the face of climate change.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And a final question. We share with the countries of the Indo-Pacific region the Pacific, so there's a great deal of trade that takes place by ship. And this has an environmental impact in terms of pollution. So are there measures that are planned to limit or reduce the impact of this type of maritime-based pollution within the overall framework of the strategy?
This particular issue falls largely with the responsibility of my colleagues in Transport Canada. I can note that Canada last year co-sponsored with Chile the Americas for the Protection of the Ocean, which is which was endorsed at the Summit of the Americas and protects our Pacific Ocean through a network of conservation measures. And it has a whole of Pacific focus, so it takes you right down along the coastline. And that will be one of the things we discuss there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bulris. We're almost to time, but Mr. Kimmich has asked for 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
It's more for you, Chair. It's just I'd like an update on whether the Minister of Finance has confirmed her appearance at this committee on either December 4th or December 11th regarding the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. That motion that was passed by this committee at the end of October. We're now at the end of November, and I would like to get an update because we had agreed to an amendment from the Parliamentary Secretary to provide those 2 meetings as her window to appear. So I'd just like an update.
I will turn to our clerk.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc,
Thank you, Chair. So the original invitation was sent to the Minister of Finance on the 27th of October, and then there were 2 recalls that were, or reminders that were sent on the 19th of November and also today, but we haven't had any reaction.
I implore upon you, Chair, to remind the Finance Minister this committee passed a motion for her to appear, and it was her Parliamentary Secretary that suggested those 2 days that she would be able to come before the committee to give us an update on an announcement that she made back in June of 2023. And I think it's of critical importance that she appears before the committee to explain the review of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, because that is the date. One of those 2 dates is also when Bob Prickard will be before the committee, and he's made those allegations. And so I would like to get an update to the committee. I'd like the Minister to confirm with the committee when she will appear, because again, it was a Parliamentary Secretary, and we agreed on those 2 days based on her schedule at the time.
I will make it my quest.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank our panel for your excellent work today. It was good to hear from all of you. Some good work going on. I want to thank our people here around the table for all of the excellent questions they aimed at you. Our clerk, our analysts, our interpreters, and everybody in the background who supports us made this a very successful session. With that, we'll adjourn.